What's going on, guys? Tosker here, and in this video we're going to create our details view. So basically we have our favorites and our contacts set up where we can load our mock data. However, what we want now is when we actually select a contact over here to the right, we actually want to display their details such as their name, maybe a profile image, some action buttons to save, and then phone, location details, etc. So that being said, let's go over here to our Solution Explorer, click on Views, and we're going to add a new user control. We're going to call this DetailsView. And now for the sake of just working with this and getting a better look at everything, we're going to change the design height to 1200 and the width to 450. So we have our grid content here. The first thing we want to do is create some row definitions since we're going to have a long vertical list of details. So we're going to do grid.row definitions, and we're going to add about 5 of the row definitions in here. Now our top row is going to be the main details, so we're going to create another grid here for that first column, or the first row, so row 0. And for this grid, we're going to have 2 columns, so grid.column definitions, column definition 2. And we're going to use the second column here just for some action buttons, so we don't need it to take up a lot of room, so we're just going to give it a width of 100. As you see here in the designer, over here we'll have the main details and then maybe some buttons over here to save or update our contact when we make changes. Alright, so now inside this grid we're going to have a contact image panel. So we're going to create a stack panel. We'll do the grid column of 0, a horizontal alignment to the left, and as always I like to have a little margin of 5. Now this stack panel is going to hold the name and the image, and we're also going to add in a little favorite checkbox, so if we want to mark this contact as a favorite. So we're going to create another stack panel, and we're going to give it an orientation of horizontal. Close that off. And now for the image, we're going to create another stack panel. This is going to hold the image and the name. We're going to give it a horizontal alignment in the center. Close that off. And then we'll create a label here. It'll have content. We're going to be binding this to the selected contact. So we're going to do selected contact.name. We're of course going to give it a fallback value in case there is no value there of no answer, or actually I'll rather just say null. Next we want this horizontal alignment. We want it to be nice and centered, so we'll give it a center. And then lastly a bigger font size here of 24. Then, as I mentioned, right below, or right next to this rather, we just want to create a simple checkbox here. We're going to make this an image later, but for now, we're just going to call this isFavorite. Now, below this, we're going to create the contact image. So we're going to create a grid, and we'll give it a height and width of, let's say, 125. Close that off. Now, inside this grid is where we're going to have our image control. We're also going to give this a height and width of 125. And then for the image, we want to access the source property, binding selected contact dot image path. Then, as we did for the selected list view contacts, we actually want to give this a fallback value of our static resource, our default image, and then also a target null value of our default contact image. And now we can close off our image control. And if we look up here at the designer, we can see that we're going to have the name, we're going to have their image, and then like I mentioned, we're later going to replace this with a little star image that's animated. But for now, this is the checkbox to mark it as favorite. Now we're going to want an option to actually change the image. So we're going to go down here, and inside this grid, and you'll see why I use the grid in a second, we're going to create a button, and we're going to give a style of the menu icon. So static resource, menu icon button. We want its background a little different. Static resource of, let's do the gloomy purple. Then we want a vertical alignment for the bottom. And then a horizontal alignment for the right. So we want it in the bottom right corner of the image. And we'll give it a foreground of black and a font weight of demi bold. And we'll close that off. And here in the content, we'll just type browse. So up here in our designer, we'll see we'll have an image, and when we're editing it, we'll be able to see this browse button where we can click it to change the image. Now lastly, for the main details view, we want to go right under our stack panel here, and now in the other column, we're going to create a stack panel, and it'll be grid column 1. So in the smaller column we made, we'll do a vertical alignment. So we'll hug our buttons to the bottom, and we'll set the orientation to horizontal. Close that off. So now lastly, we want to create a button for saving. Going to give it a style, static resource of our menu icon button. We'll give it a different background, so we'll give it a, let's say the maximum blue-green. We'll give it a width of 90. A height, a width of 90, and a height of 40, and as always, a little margin of 5. And we'll close that off, and we'll get the button content here, where we're going to create a little stack panel here, orientation to horizontal, and then we're going to create an image control, which we're going to leave empty for now. And then a label. We'll do the font weight to bold, and we'll call it save. Now the reason we have the image here is because I want to put a little icon next to the label. So here we're going to click the image. We're going to go over here to our properties, go to the source, and we want to set it to the save icon. Now back here we'll see it'll add our reference to our source. Now we only have one more thing to really make. We got our main view pretty much done. Now below it is going to be phone location details. These are all going to have the same layout essentially. So we're just going to do a little more typing, and then basically beyond this point it'll be copy and paste. So down here to our XAML, let's go a little past our grid here, and we're going to create a, let me actually label this. And then here we're going to create a little stack panel. Give it a grid row of 1 because we want it to be in the second row that we made, and give it a margin of 5. We then just want to do a little stack panel here. No real fancy property changes to that. Then we're going to create a border, and inside the border we'll have the label, and we'll do the font weight to bold. We'll do the foreground to a custom value that I have written down that I like, so you can feel free to copy the screen here. And I also will have this probably in bigger text on the screen for you. Then lastly, we want to do the content, and we want to set this to phone. Now below our border here, we want to create another stack panel, a lot of stack panels here. And we're just going to add 2 types of numbers here, so I'll comment them. We'll do home numbers, and then we'll do cell numbers. So we'll label this content of home, and then we'll have another label right below that where we'll do binding content. So we'll do binding selected contact dot phone numbers. If you remember, we used the array earlier. We'll do the first item in the array, and then we'll do a fallback value. And here, we'll just say null. And we'll close that off. I'm going to copy and paste this, and do another for cell phone numbers. And now that we got that set up, if we go look at our view, we'll see we don't have something real fancy here. It kind of looks actually a little silly or boring. So what we're going to do next is go over here to our Solution Explorer, go to our app.xaml, And in here we're going to create some custom styles for our borders and our labels. For the sake of time, I'm just going to skip the video and explain the properties that I set. Okay, so basically what I have here is a detail label that I created. We gave it a foreground of blue-gray. So basically we just created some different labels, some that look more like a title and then others that look like details that are information for the user to read. I also created a little custom border here, so we have a nice little background and rounded corners. So feel free to pause the video and copy these or go in the description below. But now after this, we only got a couple more things to do. We want to go back to our Solution Explorer, go over to our Details View, come down here to our content, and we want to apply these styles. And lastly, we want to go up here to our border and apply the border style that we created. So static resource, detail border. And now if we go up to our designer here, we'll see it actually does look a little better. Now it looks more like, okay, so this is where the phones are. This will be the home phone. We actually got to change the content here to cell. But then we have our cell phone numbers, and then right below we'll have all the numbers listed. If we wanted to add more, simply down here we would just have to add more labels for the content that we wanted. And then also we wouldn't want to forget to increase the array index as we did below. Now to see if everything's working properly, what we just got to do next is actually go over to our book view. And now we want to go down to our XAML and we want to find that grid we made earlier. Where if we see up here, this is where we're going to display the view that we just created. Now as I mentioned, our content is going to be longer, most likely, than the actual grid that we have set up. So we want to add in a scroll viewer here so we can actually scroll through the content. I'm going to create a content control. And then for the content control content, we're going to add in our view of details view. And we want to set the data context here to binding the contacts view model, because this is where we're going to have the selected contact value. So now if we go to actually run our application, see how all this works out. So now we have our application here. We see if we don't have our contacts loaded and nothing selected, we have this ugly little null view. We're later going to set something up to actually hide that when nothing's selected. But for now, we're just going to click our contacts. We see they load properly. And then as we select our contacts, we see we update our view. So now the last thing, this is the last thing we want to do is go back to our details view, go down here, and where we have our cell phone stack panel set up here, we actually want to copy and paste all this and repeat it for our emails and our locations. Alright, so we just basically just copy and pasted everything, changed some of the content, so added in the different names for the labels, and then also changed the grid rows to an ascending order. So here's our application, and once we select a contact, we can see we can use the scroll viewer to go up and down our actual view we created. What we want to do next is actually add in some implementations of, for example, if we want to edit the contact, we can hit edit and have all these labels turn into text boxes where we can change them, and then click the save button and also browse for new images.